Hey Village, today I'm going to talk about a topic that really causes a lot of anxiety and brings up a lot of nerves for first time or newer foster parents. For John and I, it was no different. We definitely were panicked. We had a lot of nerves. We didn't know what we were doing. So I'm here to talk to you about what to do and how to prepare for getting that first placement call as a foster parent. So as a foster parent, you've jumped through all of the hoops to get to the point where you're, getting that first call. You've gone through the home study, you've filled out your application, you've gone through, some extensive training. So at the point that you're getting that foster care placement call, what that means is that the county has identified that that child or children are going to be removed from their home. That could mean that they're leaving a primary family, they're leaving kinship family, or they could even be leaving another foster home. And based on the circumstance, will kind of give you an indication of how urgently placement is needed and also how much information the caseworker who's calling you is going to have. So chances are, if the child is coming from another foster family or potentially even kinship, there might be a little bit more time to make that transition, to identify a new home for that child. And with that time, the caseworker can gather more information about the child, which then can help you as a foster parent decide if you're a good fit, if you can support them. But most often when you get that call, there is not a lot of time and there's not a lot of information. The county or the agency is looking for placement within a few hours, and based off of the circumstances, they're not going to have a lot of information on that child. And if you step back and think about it, if a child is being removed from their home, the focus is really on, just making sure that the child is safe, that they're identifying, the needs and support for the family. But depending on the age of the children, you can't necessarily ask the children, what's your medical history? What school do you go to? Do you have any special needs that are going to need supported? Some kids, based on their age or development, you're not gonna get those answers from the child, and the family is going to be preoccupied with the reasons for removal. And so it's just not super realistic for caseworkers to have a long, extensive referral, which basically means that when the child is being removed from the home, they write up a referral packet that has, multiple pages of, potential information that's going to be gathered, but most of it is going to be blank. And that's based on my experience and the experience of other foster parents as well. So while this video is going to prepare you for that placement call, just keep in mind that there are certain things that, again, are going to depend on the situation, depend on the circumstances, and just realistically, based on how foster care works and why foster parents are needed, you're not always going to get all the information to make a decision as confidently as you would like. So let's talk about how you can be prepared for that first call. And this is going to differ depending on if you are a single foster parent or if you're partnered. I think that if you're single, you actually have an advantage because, you can trust yourself, your intuition, versus if you're partnered or maybe even if you have older children in your home. When you get these calls, when you get these referrals, you may want to actually have conversations with older children in the home as well. But what you can establish is really knowing your limitations as well as preparing important questions that are going to help you make the best informed and empowered choice. And I say choice because this is important. As a foster parent, you do have a choice to say yes or no to a placement call. And if you became a foster parent because you care, you have a big heart, and you want to help and support these kids and their families, I can understand why it's a challenge and it's hard to hear that you may have to say no to some of these calls. But sometimes to best support the child and the families is to acknowledge that you might not be the best fit for them. So keep that in mind and just know that an empowered no is sometimes going to be the best option, and it's not something that you should be ashamed of or, think less of yourself. It's just going to come with the territory. So sit down by yourself or with your partner or with your family and really identify what those limitations are. And that could look different based on, what your family looks like, what your community looks like, and what resources you have access to. So consider your work schedule. How much time do you really have for transportation to and from school, to and from appointments and visitations? Are there certain behaviors that you're unable to support in the home based on, maybe your trauma, your past trauma? This can be common if you've experienced something and you're going to be triggered by a child who's experienced something similar. Again, just know your limitation. Or if it's not necessarily a limitation, but just an added challenge, maybe just write your coping strategies and what you would do if you were to get a placement who would, check that box. You also want to consider other children in the home, whether they are your children or other foster care placements. For example, John and I have Darcy and Sawyer in the home who are 5 and 2. And so for us, if there is excessive aggression or fighting, anything like that, that's going to be a no for us because we want to make sure everyone in the home is safe. And that could look different in 20 years if we're lucky enough to continue to foster. That could look different if we don't have other children in the home. We might be willing to work through and support that child through those behaviors. Because it's important to understand that, these kids who are in foster care, they are not in foster care because of anything that they have done. And even if they have challenging behaviors, that doesn't make them a bad kid. They are acting in that way to fill a need, and as a foster parent, you can help fill that need in a trauma-informed way. So don't always let the behaviors that you might learn about in that placement call really scare you away from saying yes, because we've had experiences where we got a call and, even though, violence, aggression is something that is a no for us, we've had children who have been placed with us, teenagers who, supposedly had a fight in school and it was an isolated incident. And once you get the context of the situations, it's not out of the norm necessarily. So we just have to be careful about labeling kids who are in foster care based on, one instance or something where you don't really have the context around it. Because, I've said this before in other videos, I think many of us are lucky that we don't have somebody going through, how we were as a kid or a teenager and judging us based off of what came up on that list. Other limitations for you and your family could be around culture and language. So I've used this example before, but even though we would love to say yes to, say, a Spanish-speaking child, we probably wouldn't best be able to tackle that. It's something that we would want to learn the language before we were put into a situation where we were needed to support that child and family. And this also goes for, cultural values. So if you take a child in, if you know what their culture is, will you and your extended family support that culture? Does your community support that? Are there going to be kids who are going to look like them? That's important. That's incredibly important. And that doesn't necessarily make you a bad person if you acknowledge that, hey, it's probably not a good idea for us to say yes, because I don't think that their school experience would be really positive. And the goal is really to keep the kids in the same school that they were previously in, but sometimes, it might be necessary to place a child outside of their school district, and so they might be, changing schools. So know your limitations and know that by doing that ahead of time before you get that call, you're going to be able to make a much more informed and empowered choice. And ultimately, that's going to lead to less disruption, because if you don't have, those limitations listed and you say yes, and then you get the child in the home and it is not working out and it could have been avoided, that's something we really don't want to see. Once a child is placed with you, really disruption should be a last resort. I understand that it is necessary in situations, so I'm not going to say that it never should happen, but we want to limit it when we can. And then you also want to sit down and write out a list of questions that you can ask on that placement call. And this can be based off of your limitations. And again, understand that the caseworker who is calling you might not have the answers, and it's not because they didn't do their job. It's just because of the circumstances and the situation. So some of the questions that we ask are, first, are there any notable behaviors or medical conditions that we should be aware of? Again, this is going to help identify if we're going to be able to support that child the best to our ability. And also for us, we ask if they have any siblings. This is usually something that they will know, but if they have siblings and the siblings are being placed into different homes, you're going to have additional visitation, additional communication. And again, that's not necessarily something that is going to make it, oh, if they have siblings, I can't take them, but just acknowledge that there's going to be an additional commitment there. And so based off of your work schedule and your family schedule, have that understanding, right up front. We also ask the location of their school because depending on your county, how large the county is, you want to make sure that you will be able to provide transportation to keep them at that school. And if they're being placed farther away, if that means that they're going to transfer to your school. And something else that you can ask, it's not to be a nosy foster parent, but you can ask the state of the case as well as the reason that the children are entering care. What this can provide you with is if you know the state of the case, if the kids are just now entering care, you know that there could be, 6 months, a year and a half. You know that it's a fairly longer term placement. Also, what will help with that, if you are trying to find out, how long of a placement it will be, which, you're never going to know for sure, but you can get a little bit of an indication. And also by finding out the reason that the children are entering care, it can give you an indication of what trauma has occurred. So that's going to give you more information to make an empowered choice. So know your limitations, have a list of questions ready for that placement call. And at the end of the day, again, understand that all because you have your limitations and you have the questions doesn't mean that you are going to get the answers. And this is where the reality of being a foster parent is really important to share. This is what we signed up for. We signed up for not knowing. We signed up for not having answers. And so my best advice is do the best with the information that you're provided. Trust your instinct, but don't make assumptions. Don't create stories in your head. Sometimes you're even going to have answers and you'll find out later with that child that that wasn't accurate. So I know that's not what foster parents want to hear, that when they're getting a placement call, they're going to be saying yes or no, and they don't know if it's the right answer. But that is what we signed up for. And I would encourage you to have a really strong relationship and strong communication with your agency or county, because that will help filter the placement calls. A lot of times they're not going to call you if you've been really clear about those limitations and what children you can best support in your home. And I also want to remind you all that saying no to a placement call isn't always a bad thing. I hope this video helped all of you new foster parents or foster parents who are still going through the process and might have a little bit of those nerves, a little bit of anxiety around those placement calls. Keep the focus on the kids. Just know that any anxiety and nerves that you're having, that child is having and that family is having, 10 times, 100 times more. So just do your best, know your heart, know your training, know your resources, and you can't go wrong. That's it for this video, guys. If you learned something during this, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. See you next time.